The church bell struck 8, and Sunday morning enveloped the town of Fairhaven in golden light. The sun's rays filtered through the lace curtains, spilling onto the oak-colored floor as if a blessing had descended from heaven itself. The kitchen smelled of baked apple pie and fresh bread. Joanna Maynard, a pastor's wife, homemaker, and mother of 3, stood at the sink, wiping her hands on the hem of her linen apron embroidered with blue bells. Everything in the house was clean, orderly, and filled with measured piety, as befits a pastor's house. "Children, let's get dressed. We're leaving in 15 minutes, she called, but not loudly, with soft, enveloping severity. Footsteps were heard from the room above, heavy, hurried, and her eldest, Lydia, 12 years old, shouted something angry at her younger brother. Joanna sighed and headed into the hallway, where her husband, Pastor Jacob Maynard's neatly cleaned shirt hung on a rack. At that time, he was in the office praying, as always before the service. The silence in the house felt almost like a ritual. Joanna loved these morning hours, when everything was under control. The house, the children, the clothes, even the weather. The day began with a mantra of order. This was her kingdom, her temple within a temple. Even if her heart was heavy, she never showed it. While the buns were baking, she straightened the basket of hymns, stacked fresh church bulletins on the table, and checked that her husband's shoes were clean. Joanna did not allow herself to leave anything to chance. Everything had to be as expected. Jacob appeared in the hallway as if on cue, a book under his arm. His tall stature, slender figure, and good-natured but stern smile made him an impeccable example of virtue in the eyes of his parishioners. "Is everything ready, honey?" he asked, kissing her temple. "Everything is as always," she answered with a smile reflecting from the tense spring inside. She wasn't unhappy, but it wasn't called happiness either. It just was the way it should be. Fairhaven Methodist Church was the center of not only the spiritual, but also the social life of the town. Everyone knew the pastor, and of course everyone knew Joanna. Women often envied her neat hair, her ability to run a house and children, and her impeccable behavior. Men, even those who outwardly seemed rude, looked at her with respect, or with interest, but no one dared even hint at it. She was a shrine. "It's a wonderful morning, Mrs. Maynard. Cinnamon rolls today." Missy Lewis, the school principal's widow, winked at her. Of course, like every first Sunday of the month, Joanna nodded and smiled. The service went smoothly. Jacob spoke about the sin of thought, about patience, about faith in a wife, in a husband, in a family. Joanna sat in the front row with the children, her hands folded in her lap. Her face was calm, almost iconic, but inside, something was slowly cracking. Returning home, she took off her hat and pearl hairpin. Jacob went to visit an old parishioner, leaving her with the children. Lydia turned on music in her headphones. The youngest, Eli, sat down with Legos, and 5-year-old Sarah tried to memorize a verse from a book. Joanna automatically started cleaning, as if the house shines, then the soul will become cleaner. But standing at the window, looking at the white wooden fence and the neighbor's apple tree, she suddenly felt something is leaving, some part of herself that no one here knew. A woman who once dreamed of going to Florence, a woman who loved to draw, a woman who perhaps could still have passion, not for faith, not for children, not for my husband's business, and to life, to the feeling that she is a living being and not a satin wrapper of family responsibilities. When the door closed behind the children, Lydia took the younger ones into the bedroom. As was customary on Sundays, after the service, Joanna went upstairs to her room. The room that she shared with her husband, but which over the years became only her. There was nothing intimate there except her own thoughts. Clean bed linen with a floral pattern, 3 neatly folded blankets at the foot, a night light in the form of a lamp with a porcelain shade. Everything seemed cozy, but alien, like in a hotel where you stay again and again until you notice that you are living in it. She sat down on the edge of the bed, leaning forward slightly, supporting her chin with her hand, like a person who doesn't have to go anywhere does. No rush, neither smile, nor keep your back straight. The evening cool came from the street, the blinds fluttered in the window, and this soft, diffused light fell on her shoulders. She was still wearing the dress, light beige with lace trim, too correct to be loved, just like everything else in her life. Taking off her shoes, Joanna slowly lay down on the bed. Not under the covers, she simply stretched out lengthwise, placing her hands on her stomach, and froze. She didn't sleep. I haven't read it. I didn't look at the ceiling. She stayed. Everything she felt at that moment was contained in silence, thick, viscous, like honey that you don't want to swallow. Silence from which you don't want to hide, because it contains the truth. A couple of years ago, winter morning, same house, same bedroom. Joanna stood by the window in her pajamas, hugging her shoulders. Jacob had just left on his way to a meeting with a youth group. The children were eating cereal downstairs. She watched school children running down the street, disheveled, laughing, alive. And she stood inside, behind the glass, like painting, drawn for prying eyes. All her actions had an audience. Food, hairstyle, manners, voice, everything existed in order to be testimony of faith. But who testified to her? She suddenly remembered how in her youth she wanted to become a librarian. Not because she loved books, but because she dreamed of silence and personal space. I dreamed of sitting in a chair by the window, reading, without making excuses to anyone. I dreamed of living in a world where you don't have to smile for someone's peace. One of those days when ladies' meetings were held in the church hall, an evening of spiritual joy. Everyone came to the parsonage, brought pies, talked about grace and miracles. Joanna stood by the coffee pot and listened to Caroline Weaver talk about feminine strength through submission. Everyone nodded, gasped, and admired, and Joanna let go. Her smile that evening was forced, as if glued. Later, when she was clearing away the plates, she accidentally broke her favorite cup. And she stood over the fragments, surprised that doesn't cry. She felt that if she gave free rein, she would not be able to stop. It will be a stream that cannot be given a nice label. Neither test, nor purification, nor prayerful contrition. It will be a lively, painful cry, which will not fit into any church program. A recent morning, Jacob leaned over her in bed, placing his hand on her thigh. He wanted intimacy like a priest reading a familiar liturgy. But Joanna's body closed, tense, cold, hasn't responded for a long time. She felt neither love nor disgust, only indifference. He didn't notice, or didn't want to notice. Afterwards, he kissed her forehead and thanked her, and she went to the bathroom and stood under the shower without turning on the hot water. The cold pierced the bones, and in this pain, she finally felt something. At least it's something. Now, lying on the bed, she remembered all this as someone else's life. It's as if someone gave her a script, and she played everything correctly. She learned the role, rehearsed, and was perfect. Only alive, she never felt herself. Becoming a pastor's wife was not her dream. It was a choice for love, but love has turned into a form. He loved God, and he loved her like an appendix. As part of the mission, he said that she was his gift from the Almighty, and it was beautiful. But the gift is not asked whether it wants to be given. She didn't know who she was. Not my mother, not my wife, not a sister in Christ. She reflects someone's expectations, a mirror onto which images are applied, but which never reflects. Internal. The phrase she once whispered into her notebook rang in her ears. Where does my faith end and my silence begin? She hasn't written for a long time. Her diary lay in a drawer under a sacred book, hidden like sin. Last entry 2 years ago. Sometimes I pray not to God, but to myself. I ask, are you still here, or have we lost you? At night, when the children are asleep and the house is quiet, Joanna sometimes gets up and walks around the house barefoot. She touches walls and objects, as if looking for confirmation of her reality. At such moments she could have screamed, but there was silence in the house part of her armor. Now, in the room, in this slow, almost transparent silence, she was not afraid to remember. The fear disappeared when there was no need to make a face. Fear was her mask in front of others. And now there was only rest, dark, deep, like water in a well. And in this piece, a question arose that had not yet become a solution. What if I can't live this life anymore? There was no answer, and she didn't wait for him. She's just laying down. I was breathing. I listened to my heart, like for the first time. And I felt a single tear running down my cheek. The teacher's room at Fairhaven School smelled of fresh coffee, ink, and boredom. There was a certain silence here, not the same as in Joanna's bedroom, oppressive, like a glass bell. Here it was different, filled with anticipation, the nervous whisper of papers, the clicks of automatic pencils, and occasional giggles. In this space, where adults hid from children behind piles of assignments and diaries, Joanna for the first time felt alive. She came to school to bring a cake for the end-of-term celebration, a tradition started by the mothers of the church community. Usually, she left the box on the table, nodded to the secretary, and left without stopping. But that day, Mrs. Randall, the assistant principal, insisted that she stay for a few minutes, wait until the meeting was over, so she could hand over the treats herself. "Your baked goods always sell out first," she said with a smile. "I think the teachers will be happy to thank you personally." She stayed, and it was at this random moment that I looked at her for the first time. He was new, from out of state. Young, too young by Fairhaven standards, he seemed even younger than 28. Tall, with casually tousled brown hair, wearing a shirt with rolled-up sleeves, he sat in the corner, his hand on a folder. His fingers were stained with chalk. And when their eyes met, he nodded slightly, with a slight, almost shy smile. Nothing special, casual politeness. But in that look, there was something else. "You must be Mrs. Maynard," he said later, when the crowd of teachers had dispersed, and he walked over to the table with the cake. She was a little confused. Not from words, from tones. He did not look at her with churchly reverence, did not look for traces of piety on her face. He looked at how a man looks at a woman, and not the pastor's wife. Not with impudence, with interest. Human, simple, real. "Joanna," she introduced herself. "Do you teach literature?" "English and drama," he answered with the same soft expression on his face. "Matthew Green, but the students call me Mr. Green, and you are a great baker. Is this your cake?" "Yes," she grinned. "I have 3 children. I learned for survival reasons." He laughed, and the sound of his laughter seemed to erase the boundary between them. She felt a lightness, an almost childlike excitement that she could just talk. "It's amazing how food can be a form of communication," he added, "especially in a small town. Here everything is conveyed through food and looks." Joanna didn't know what to say. She felt her inner walls rise like shields, but not all the way. Something in his voice, in the way he spoke, in the way he bowed his head slightly when he listened, made her open. "Did you adapt quickly?" she asked, purely formally. "Sort of. The people here are friendly, but sometimes it feels like I'm reading a novel without a preface. Everyone knows each other, and you barge in mid-story." This phrase hurt her. She understood. He is also lonely. Let him hide it under irony and smiles, but he is a stranger in this city, and strangers always see deeper. They only spoke for a few minutes, but that was enough. She left feeling strangely excited. It wasn't romantic. It was like after a sip of cold water in the heat, as if someone saw in her not a function, but a person. The following weeks passed quietly. Joanna returned to her routine: church, home, school, dinner, prayer, wiping grease from the frying pan. But that moment in the staff room still lived in her memory, a short dialogue that she could not throw away. And then it happened at the library. Lydia forgot her literature book at home, and Joanna agreed to stop by the school library. In the evening, the children were at their grandmother's. Jacob had gone to a conference, and the evening was free. The librarian, old Mrs. Henshaw, opened the door for her and left her alone, warning her to turn off the light when leaving. She found the book she needed, but was delayed. There was a strange comfort between the shelves, the smell of old pages, and the feeling that time was moving slower. "Do you need help with something?" she heard a voice. Matt, in a sports jacket, with 2 volumes of Shakespeare under his arm. He was just as surprised as she was. "I'm just reading a book." "My daughter forgot," she muttered, feeling herself beginning to blush. "And you stayed to read half of the fund." They laughed again. A minute later, he offered her tea from a teacher's mug with the Class of 2009 inches logo. We sat down at a table by the window. He said that he stays in the evenings to write a play with his students. He talked about Tennessee Williams, about symbols, about feelings that cannot be voiced directly. Joanna listened and found herself saying, "Doesn't want to leave." This is how it began book exchange. He left bookmarks with notes for her in library volumes, which she accidentally took after. She answered with short phrases in the margins. Her handwriting was neat, small, almost shy. He is sweeping, artistic. After a while, the notes became longer. Steel letters. He quoted poetry to her, and she shared childhood memories. He asked questions, she answered too honestly. But these letters were never discussed out loud. They lived between the lines, between books, between meetings that were not planned. Sometimes they crossed paths in the corridor between classes, in line for coffee, and their views were no longer innocent. They knew there was something untold, but significant. But they didn't give it a name. They didn't dare. Not yet. And there hasn't been any betrayal yet. There was no touching. But every word, every line was a step towards where her other life began, not as a pastor's wife, not as a mother of 3 children, but as a woman whom someone saw, and he wanted to hear. The evening came like most others in this city, softly, imperceptibly, with golden light on the walls, with the smell of cut grass, with the curtains shaking in the open windows. Joanna put dinner on plates, made sure the children's teeth were brushed, kissed Sarah on the forehead, reminded Lydia about church tomorrow, and when the living room clock struck 9, a resigned silence reigned in the house. Jacob was at an overnight prayer meeting. He often stayed late into the evening, especially before large services. His return was not expected until midnight. At this time, the house resembled an empty shell. On the outside, it was still a pastor's house, but inside, it was only the echo of her steps. She closed the bedroom door, but did not go there. Downstairs, only the lamp above the kitchen table was burning. Joanna stood in the corridor, leaning her back against the wall, and holding a letter in her hands, a folded sheet of paper that smelled of something masculine. Mint, ink, and, as it seemed to her, bitterness. I'm still not sure how we ended up writing. It's kind of like a prayer that shouldn't be. But it happened. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that I'm thinking about you, and not as a pastor's wife. How about a woman whose silence is more beautiful than all the songs I've heard? She did not respond to this letter. I read it and hid it. But today, she got him again. And as happens when a thought has already matured in the body before in the mind, she took a step towards the door. Then the second one. Then the third. He lived in an apartment above an antique store. No one saw her approach his porch. There was silence on the street, only crickets and rare headlights in the distance. My heart was beating like a schoolgirl's. She was 35 years old. 3 children. The husband is a pastor. And she's standing in front of another man's door, not knowing what he would say, not knowing if he would open, without knowing why she came. He opened it a few seconds later. Wearing a black t-shirt and dark jeans, barefoot, he looked different than he did at school. There was no teacher or morality in him, only a person tired, confused, alive. "Hello," she said. The voice broke. He didn't answer, he just stepped back and opened the door wider. She entered. The silence between them was not heavy. It was rich. She didn't look at him. She looked at the floor. Creaking boards, books on the floor, open notebooks. The smell of lavender and tobacco, and men's skin. "I can't stay here long," she said. It was a lie. She's already stayed. He didn't say anything. He turned and walked deeper into the room. She took off her coat and hung it on the back of the chair, not knowing why. She sat down. She rested her hands on the table. He stood at the window, his back to her. The light fell on his neck, and for the first time she saw how vulnerable he was. Humans, man, not a symbol. "I don't know," she said quietly, "how it happened that we... Have you come to this?" He finished without turning around. "Yes, I don't know either." Pause. The silence boiled over. "I didn't ask you to come." I know. I didn't think you'd come. She stood up. She took a step towards him. Then another one. She stood behind him. The warmth of his skin was felt in the air, like in a steam room. She reached out and touched his shoulder barely, as if apologizing. He turned slowly. Their eyes met. No one had an answer. He touched her cheek with the pads of his fingers. It was like touching a living being for the first time. Not to the body, to the source of pain and silence. She closed her eyes. Not from pleasure, from fear, from desire, because I couldn't go back anymore. And when he kissed her, it was not passionate. Not like in the books. It was a kiss to the wounded place. A kiss is like washing. Clean, quiet, imperfect. They didn't speak anymore. Without undressing completely, he leaned over her. On the floor, on an old carpet, under the dim light of a table lamp. Her body trembled at first, like that of an animal that had not been touched without permission for years. But then it began to respond, quiet as if remembering what could be desirable. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't easy. It was like a prayer read out loud for the first time. He was breathing heavily, like a man who had carried this sin inside himself for a long time, and now he had let it go. She was crying. No sound. Not out of shame. From the volume of everything that has accumulated in it. When it was all over, they lay in silence. Her head is on his chest. His hand is on the back of her head. No romance, only warm. Two souls, wounded in different ways, found a crack and folded into each other. It was a sin, she said 20 minutes later, when she stood up and put her clothes back on. Yes, he answered. But why didn't it look like a sin? He didn't answer, and she didn't wait for an answer. On her way out, she stopped at the door, turned around. I don't know if I'll come again. He looked into her eyes and said, It doesn't matter. You've already arrived. She nodded. She closed the door behind her, and she went back into the night. Spring has arrived in Fairhaven earlier than usual. There was a strange, oppressive warmth in the air, as if the world had forgotten what month it should be in. Everything smelled of earth, trees, hints. The city breathed deeper, more freely. Only Joanna doesn't. She was alarmingly quiet. The last 2 weeks have flown by in a blur. Services, children's homework, school assemblies, evening prayers, everything was done by inertia. The body moved, the voice spoke, the fingers cut vegetables and ironed shirts. But consciousness, it remained there in that room above the antique store. In the dark, in his hands, in his breath. She swore to herself, never again. After one more time, and that's it. And then again, and again, no witnesses. Without words, only meetings short, stolen, measured to the minute. The letters stopped, words became unnecessary. Their bodies now knew everything. And then one day, after the school literary club meeting, where Lydia performed with a project on To Kill a Mockingbird, Joanna stayed late. I'll help you clean up, she offered. It seemed careless, but Matt caught the nuance. Of course, he said. I'll turn off the projector for now. The audience was emptying. Parents left with their children. Someone was laughing in the corridor. Doors were slamming. Everything sounded far away, like in another world. They were left alone. She collected the books from the table and put the markers in a box. He came up, and he didn't say anything. He just stood there, close, warm. Their hands accidentally touched. By chance, but they didn't pull back. They both knew it was dangerous, that even the smell of her perfume could be evidence. But the moment overstepped caution. He reached out his hand, gently touched her chin, and lifted it up. Their gazes met, and she, as if automatically, reached out to him. Their lips met. Not passionately, not hastily, but as if they were quietly thanking each other for the fact that they could breathe in this airless space. This lasted no more than a few seconds. But someone saw them. Mother. This voice was not loud. It sounded like an echo, like the echo of a dream, but cut into the heart sharper than a knife. Joanna pulled away from Matt with such force that it was as if she had punched him. I turned around and saw Lydia. Her daughter stood in the doorway, frozen in the threshold. In his hands is a folder with drawings. There is an expression on the face that hasn't decided what to feel yet. The eyes were full of something more than horror. They had betrayed, not yet realized, but had already begun to germinate. Lydia, Joanna whispered, It's not what you think. The phrase was pathetic, template, and terribly late. Lydia didn't say a word. She stared at her mother, at the teacher, at the empty classroom, and, without making a sound, turned and left. At first, the step is fast. Then run, the quiet slam of a door at the end of the corridor, and silence. Subscribe if you're tired of being silent. Joe, Matt began. She didn't answer. I wasn't breathing. She stood like a statue, her hands clenched into fists, her lips trembling. Joanna, listen. This. Shut up, she said quietly but sharply. Please, Matt, just. No, not now. He retreated. There was understanding in his eyes, fear, and still the same pain that was between them from the very beginning, the pain that brought them here. She took her bag and quickly threw on her coat, almost without looking at him. She won't say anything, she muttered, more to herself than to him. She's a girl. My daughter, she is silent when she is afraid. I know. Matt didn't stop her, and he did the right thing. She ran out into the night, barefoot in her shoes, not remembering where she had parked the car. My heart was pounding in my chest like a pulse in my ears. She couldn't feel her fingers. My hands were shaking as if I had a fever. She just walked, and she walked, and she walked. The house was in darkness. The children were sleeping, so it seemed. Sarah in bed, Eli with an open comic, Lydia there was no. Panic surged with renewed vigor. She walked around the whole house, looked into the bathroom, into the basement. Silence. She went out onto the porch. Then I saw Lydia on a swing under an old maple tree. She sat motionless, her face in the shadows, like a silhouette. Joanna came over, slowly, like a wild animal that can run away at the slightest sound. Lyd, she began. How many? The girl interrupted. Just one word. No tears, no hysteria, only direct questions. This, I don't know what to tell you, Joanna breathed, sitting down next to her. How many times? Lydia, do you love him? These words were like a slap in the face. From a child, from the girl whom she swaddled, bottled, and put to bed with prayers. I don't know. It's a mistake. Mom, Lydia said quietly, almost silently, this doesn't look like an error. It was. For real. You were. Real. Joanna wanted to cry, but she couldn't. She looked at her daughter and felt something breaking inside her. Forgive me, she whispered. Sorry, I didn't want you to see. I didn't want you to find out. Why did you? Why him? You. We. The girl hesitated. There was no malice in her voice, only confusion. Dad, he doesn't know anything, Joanna interrupted. He doesn't know, Lydia. And you shouldn't. I'm not asking you to lie. I'm just asking for time. Please just. They sat for a long time. The wind shook the old branches, the swing creaked. Lydia was silent. Tears flowed down her cheeks, clear as rain. Not for children, any more adult tears. And Joanna suddenly realized that she broke not only herself, she cracked through her daughter. And that was the worst thing. Pastor Jacob Maynard sat on the edge of his bed, clutching a book. The light bulb above the bedside table crackled under tension, the flickering light casting uneven spots on the wall. He didn't sleep for the second night. His daughter, Lydia, she told everything. He didn't scream when he heard it, didn't hit the table with his fist, didn't raise his hand. He just froze. It was as if something had snapped in his heart, the air, his faith, and his flesh had become alien. Dad, I couldn't take it anymore. Lydia said in a trembling, broken voice. I saw, at school, in class, they kissed, Mom and Mr. Green. How many times? He asked, evenly, almost silently. I don't know. She didn't speak, but she didn't deny it. I saw the way she looked at him. This is not an accident. This is true. He listened and felt his entire inner being crumbling. Wife, his wife. His name is Joanna. She was the center of his world, a support in his pastoral ministry. The mother of his children, first to prayer, first to service, and now sinner. He didn't go to her that night, didn't say a word. He prayed. But the prayers were dry, hard, like stones in the mouth. In the morning, I called the elders. The church council met 2 days later. Everything went quickly, officially, as if it was not about life, but about order in the schedule. 6 men and 2 women. All of them are elderly, with careful expressions on their faces. Their looks were not angry. They were compassionately judgmental, worse than anger. Joanna came by invitation. She knew this would happen. I didn't ask who called, didn't ask why. She dressed simply, a gray dress, tied-up hair, no makeup. She looked like a man coming to execution, but who accepted it in advance. The room smelled of freshly brewed coffee and dusty hymnals. There were mugs on the table. One of the elders, Brother Wesley, tapped the table. We'll start. Present, Brother Maynard, pastor. Sister, Joanna Maynard, members of the church council. He listed everyone as if reading lists from the protocol. Agenda, issue regarding moral failure and potential violation of marital vows by the pastor's wife. Silence. Joanna, he began, we ask you to tell the truth. In the name of God, in the name of the church, in the name of your soul, do you admit that you had inappropriate relationship with another man who's not your husband? She looked at him. Then she looked at Jacob. He didn't look at her. Only down. Yes, she said. The voice did not tremble. No reproach, no regrets, only finding the facts. One of the women, Mrs. Harriet Grayson, old, tall, with a purple scarf, sighed, placing her hands on her knees as if about to say a prayer, but could not find the words. We, Brother Jonathan began, we are surprised. We are shocked. You are a pastor's wife. You must be an example. How could you? Silence. You have children, Joanna. You taught Sunday school. You confessed to the sisters. You. He stopped. Why? She didn't answer. Was it one time? Asked Harriet. No, everything is just as smooth. The pause was deafening. Everyone understood. This is the end. How long ago? Now Wesley's brother. Several months. With the young teacher. Nod. He's not from the church, someone remarked. This is an external threat. Temptation. This decision, Harriet suddenly snapped. No one seduces you if you don't want to be seduced. Joanna nodded. She didn't need to be protected. She could not be justified, and she didn't try. Jacob finally spoke. His voice was dry, like an autumn leaf. I don't want blood. I don't demand expulsion. But this cannot remain without consequences. The church is a body. If part of it is infected, it is either treated or cut off. We don't cut you off out of spite, Wesley added. We do this for the sake of the purity of the service. Joanna, Harriet again, if you repent and leave the church community, maybe, years from now, we can discuss your return. But now, you have to leave. Silence. And again, not a cry, not an argument, not a defense. Only, I understand. And you will leave the pastor's house. Yes. Will you stop communicating with Mr. Green? Pause. Long. Very long. Yes. That same evening, before the evening service, the parishioners were informed. Be careful with bad notes, but clear. The pastor's wife, due to violation of spiritual and family vows, has been temporarily excommunicated from the church. The women didn't ask for details, but everyone knew. They felt it in their facial expressions, in Mrs. Sloane's disapproving gaze, avoiding touching, in the empty space on the front pew where Joanna always sat, the fact that the children walked next to their father, but not with her. And she walked down the street to the house where they were no longer waiting for her. Neither the church, neither the flock, neither the husband, neither the children, only a shadow of her name, cut out from the community like a knife to the living. She didn't cry. She didn't moan. Her face was calm. But in this calm, there was terrible loneliness. The highway seemed endless. A dark ribbon, silent and alien, stretched through nowhere. Headlights snatched the side of the road from the darkness, rare road signs, silhouettes of trees, and then again only a black canvas. No oncoming cars, no motels, no signs. Only the road and car, filled with a silence more frightening than any storm. Joanna held the steering wheel with both hands. She sat straight, tense, as if she had merged with a seat. The light from the dashboard gave her face a deathly green tint. She didn't blink. I didn't look in the mirror. Didn't look back. She was driving because it was impossible to stay. There are 3 children in the cabin. Lydia is in the front seat, arms crossed over her chest, her face frozen in contempt. Sarah and Ellie slept in the back, huddled together like baby animals who sense danger but cannot name it. Suitcases are in the trunk, packed hastily as if in a fire. Personal cosmetic bag, school things, change of linen. Nothing from home. The house remained behind us with the lights off, silent and alien, like a cross. She was expelled. Officially, on behalf of God. Her husband didn't say a word when she returned after the council. He just pointed to the door, not screaming, with a gesture, as if he was showing the way to a criminal. Not my wife, not mother's. Take the children, he said, but you shouldn't be here tomorrow. And she collected them. And now it's night. Car. Road. Are we going to Grandma's? Sarah asked quietly, barely waking up, stuttering half asleep. Yes, honey, Joanna answered, without taking her eyes off the road. Will Dad come later? Silence. Sarah fell asleep again, and this was a salvation. Because Joanna, I didn't know what to say. Lydia was silent. From the very beginning, she didn't ask where they were going, didn't demand an explanation. But she sat with a stony face, turning to the window. The light from the lanterns sometimes highlighted her profile, a thin nose, lips clenched like those of an adult woman. An adult but wounded. It's too early. Lydia, Joanna began. Don't talk. Her voice was firm. Not now, and maybe never. I know you're angry. You have the right, but we can't throw everything into the abyss. We're still family. Lydia turned around. Slowly, her eyes light, like Joanna's, were full of disgust. You are not my family, she said. Family is something that you don't destroy for the sake of. For the sake of some teacher, family is my dad. This is a church. This was before you. And you. You are now only a woman who betrayed us. Joanna gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. But she didn't say anything. She knew she had no right to make excuses. They drove on. The gas station lights were flashing on the side of the road. She turned. The car pulled up at the old Sinclair. Nearby, there is a coffee machine, a dirty window with stickers, and a half-asleep man at the cash register. Everything looked like a temporary shelter for those who ran away. Go out and warm up. I'll go get some water, she said. Lydia didn't answer. I stayed in the car. Joanna bought 3 bottles of water and Snickers for the children. I watched the coffee slowly drip into a plastic cup and felt that her hands were shaking. Not from fatigue, out of shame, from the unbearable impossibility of returning to something former. Are you okay, ma'am? Asked the cashier, a young guy, bored, but not indifferent. She nodded. She smiled, almost the same as before. It's just a long road. He gave her the change, handed her the check, and she walked back out into the night. The parking lot was quiet, only the hum of light above the entrance, night insects, and the sound of her own steps. When she returned to the car, Sarah was no longer asleep. She had red eyes. Mommy, are we coming home again? Joanna didn't know what to say. She squatted down, opening the door, and stroked her daughter's head. Home is where we are together, she whispered, but even in my own ears, it sounded like a pity. Lydia leaned back in her seat and rolled her eyes. The silence became almost tangible, like the hum of electricity in an old house. All that was left was to move on. Around 4 in the morning, they turned off the highway. Old houses, lonely fences, rare lanterns. Her mother's house is the last one on the street. It was old, 2-story, with peeling paint and a porch that was long in need of repair. She stopped at the side of the road. Headlights illuminated the wooden railing. Everything was the same as in childhood. Only now she was returning not as a daughter, but as a fallen woman. She left. She knocked on the door. Once, then more. The light came on the second floor. "Who's there?" The mother's voice, sleepy, hoarse. "It's me, Mom." Pause. "Joanna?" "Yes. We. Can we stay for a while?" "Are you with the children?" "Yes." Events. The door creaked. Joanna led the children inside. Sarah pressed herself close to her. Eli stumbled from fatigue. Lydia walked last, as if she was stepping over respect for the last time. The mother stood in her dressing gown, looking intently, for a long time. "What did you do?" she asked quietly. And Joanna lowered her eyes. "That's it," she whispered. "I did everything." Mother's house smelled of dust and old incense. When Joanna walked inside, up the steps, along the corridor where children's drawings and photographs had once hung, she felt as if she was returning not to a person, but to a crypt of memories. Everything here was the same as before, and therefore more terrible. Nothing had changed, even the floorboards creaked in the same places, and only the lack of mirrors hurt my eyes. There was not a single mirror in my mother's house. Not in the bathroom, not in the hallway, not on the dressing table. Many years ago, as a child, Joanna heard an explanation. In a house where there is a lot of sin, you don't need to look at the reflection. The soul can see not itself, but what it has become. She didn't understand then. Now I understand too well. She put the children in her old room. Sarah immediately fell asleep, curled up into a ball, clutching the teddy bear she had managed to grab to her chest. Eli hugged the pillow and didn't ask questions. But Lydia didn't say a word, didn't say goodnight. She just lay down on the edge of the bed, turned to the wall, and wrapped herself in a blanket, as if she wanted to separate herself from the world with a cloth. Her mother was waiting for her in the kitchen. Joanna walked there slowly, as if she was conducting an interrogation. My legs were giving way. My hands were icy. Her soul wanted to hide under the bed, like in childhood, when her father screamed and her mother was silent. Mother was sitting at the table in her old shawl with a half-empty mug of tea. The light above her was dim and yellow. Branches of dried laurel hung overhead. Her face, wrinkled and senile, was sternly calm, not hostile ritual. "Sit down," she said. Joanna sat down, slowly, on the edge of the chair. The silence stretched out like dough. The clock was ticking. There is no sound outside the window. Not even the crickets sang in this part of the city. "I heard," the mother finally began. "I heard what you did." Her voice was without intonation, like that of a woman who speaks not for the first time and knows that the meaning is not in words, but in the heaviness of the silence between them. "Don't ask how," she continued. "Everything in Fairhaven becomes known. You were a pastor's wife. The word goes through the streets like a snake through the grass." Joanna nodded. She wasn't going to deny it. Neither beg, no making excuses. The mother looked at her carefully, too attentive, like someone else's. "Do you understand what you did?" "Yes." "You slept with another man, not your husband." "Yes." "You have disgraced the family name, name of God, the name of your children. You burned your flesh and your soul." Joanna squeezed her knees under the table, but didn't pull away. She didn't tremble. Only my heart beat slowly in my chest, like a stone against a wall. "Why?" asked the mother. "What were you missing?" Joanna looked down. The answer was as scary as the question. "Myself." The mother chuckled. No joy, as if I heard something stupid. "Myself. A woman who is married does not belong to herself. She belongs to her husband, home, God. Maybe that's the problem," Joanna whispered. "Don't blaspheme." The mother's voice suddenly became stronger. You are now out of wedlock. Outside the community, you are an adulteress, Joanna. Is this clear to you? Yes, her voice was quiet. Everything is clear to me. Then understand, the mother continued, constantly looking into her eyes. You did it a great sin, one of the hardest. Carnal, stubborn, proud. You're not just lost, you're reproaching the very will of God, choosing your desire instead of a vow. Silence. The ticking of the clock, ringing in the ears. Do you know where people like you go? Yes, again, hoarsely. You will burn. In hell. You have lost yourself, and even if you beg for forgiveness, you will not return to the life you had. All you knew was dead. Joanna looked up. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. I was just watching. Maybe it's good that he died. Mother raised her eyebrows, easily, chilling. Don't you even regret it now? I'm sorry, Joanna said, but not about the fact that she loved, and about the fact that I didn't live earlier. She lived only for everyone except herself. This selfishness, you sound like you're fallen. Because I am the fallen one. Silence again. It was as if the house itself was absorbing this confession. Not a scream, not a hit, only shame. The mother leaned back in her chair and clasped her fingers together. I looked at the ceiling for a long time. You can stay, she finally said. But in this house, there is no talk about him. No letters, not a word. You don't set a bad example for your children. You're not trying to justify yourself. You live quietly, silently, as it should be. I understood. And one more thing. Mother slowly stood up. Don't look for mirrors. They are not here. I won't let you admire what you've done. She walked into the darkness of the corridor, leaving Joanna alone. The light swung over the table. The snoring of an old cat could be heard from the next room. The clock continued to tick. Joanna sat motionless. In this house, in this kitchen, in this new life, which was no longer life, but a sentence, she dropped her head into her hands, and for the first time in many weeks wanted to disappear. The mother's house was drafty, smelling of old books and hidden prayers, as if the air itself was tense between past and present. Day after day, the habit of living slowly died within its walls. Joanna existed. She did not sleep, but lay, didn't eat, but picked at the food, did not speak, but apologized with glances, movements, invisible gestures that did not require words. And that wasn't the worst thing. The worst thing was Sarah's silence. Sarah is the eldest, 12 years old, but an adult, more mature than you need to be at this age. She didn't scream. She didn't blame me. She didn't make a scene like Lydia. She didn't ask Eli, are we going to Mr. Green's school again now, or to another one? Sarah just didn't say. Didn't contact my mother. Didn't look in her direction. She didn't even show irritation. Only complete detachment, silence, which grew from day to day, like ice under thin ice. Neither yes nor no. No complaint, no question. Joanna didn't know what was worse, the reproach or this silent nothing. They met in the morning in the kitchen. Sarah took bread, cut herself some toast, spread peanut butter, and poured milk. All by herself. I didn't ask. I didn't wait. If the mother offered help, silence. If she asked, do you want an apple? Silence. Not a glance. Not a sign. One day, Joanna put an orange cut into slices on her tray. Sarah silently moved the plate to the side. Not evil, just like trash. At that moment, Joanna felt something inside die. It was worse in the evenings. Dinner took place in complete silence. Just the sound of forks, and the whisper of an old TV in another room, where my mother was watching a channel with sermons and discussions of news from the world of Christianity. Sometimes there was malice in the preacher's voice. We pray for the one who is tempted. We do not condemn, but we separate ourselves from sin. And let us not forget that a woman who leaves her husband for the sake of carnal desire will share the fate of the whore of Babylon. These words seemed to be directed straight to her. The church was visible from the yard. On the hill, white with a gold cross. A church that has more of it there wasn't. Jacob now served alone, or with a new assistant as strict and smooth as all the women of Fairhaven. Every Sunday a bell would ring over the town, dull, ringing like a blow to the heart. Sometimes Sarah stood at the window and looked out there. Joanna caught her gaze and froze. I wanted to come up and ask, "Are you bored? Do you want to go back?" But I was afraid, because I knew Sarah was already there on that hill, with them, not with my mother, no longer with my mother. When the bell rang, Sarah closed her eyes, as if listening to familiar music. There is a barely perceptible shadow of a smile on the lips. Joanna looked at her and understood. Her daughter was leaving. Not in a metaphor. Literally, her soul is no longer here. The calls started coming in almost immediately. Local newspaper short article. Pastor Maynard's wife left church community after serious violations of spiritual discipline. No names. But Fairhaven was not a town that needed names. Then calls, timid at first. Then straight lines. This is true. Women's voices asked. Is it true that you were with the teacher? Have you confessed? Are you alone now? She didn't answer. Sometimes she hung up. Sometimes I listened. Sometimes I threw the phone in the desk drawer so as not to see the screen. One man, an old parishioner, called and simply said, "In our church, they no longer pray for you. You have been removed from the petition list." And he hung up. Sarah knew. She knew everything. There were whispers at her school. The teachers stopped saying hello. Friends looked away. Even the librarian, who used to be so affectionate, now spoke to her briefly, sternly, as if she got burned if the conversation went longer than 10 seconds. One day, she came home earlier than usual. Didn't say why. She just walked in, sat down silently at the table, and began to read. Joanna approached, carefully, timidly, and sat down opposite. In hand is a cup of cocoa. "I know it's hard for you," she said, her voice trembling. "But I'm your mother. I'm still your mom." Sarah looked at her. For a long time, slowly, then she lowered her gaze and didn't say anything. Joanna burst into tears that night. In the bathroom, with a towel in your mouth so as not to wake the children. Sobbing, hunched over, devastated. Everything she had, everything she lived for destroyed. Not just marriage, not just a house, but daughter's love. And that was the worst of all. Every morning she prepared breakfast. 1. I tried to revive the house. Changed the bed. Hung up clean towels. I put flowers. Nobody noticed. Sarah didn't look her in the eye. Didn't touch it. She did not utter a word addressed to her. She talked to Grandma, to Eli, to Lydia, even to the cat. But not with my mother. Between them there was the smell of sin. Sarah felt it. He ate into the walls, in clothes, into Joanna's very skin. And yet, she continued, because this was the desert, when your daughter's silence is louder than the worst curses, when the church on the hill doesn't just ring a bell, but calls for crucifixion, when you're standing in your own home and you have no voice in it, and all you have left is this faith, no longer in God, but in what one day Sarah will say at least a word, at least one. Let it be evil, let it be desperate, but alive. For now, only silence. Everything sounds louder at night, even breathing, even your own thoughts, especially them. Joanna lay on the old sofa in the living room, where under the armrest you could still feel a child's scratch, the one she had made at age 7, drawing a sprig of grapes with her fingernail while waiting for her mother to finish talking with her father. Almost 3 decades passed, but the sofa was still there, and the shadows in the corners were still moving under the dim nightlight, like then. Memories now live in these shadows from marriage, not cruel, not humiliating, but cold, like a bath that you are forced to immerse yourself in every morning because that's the way it's supposed to be. And you get used to it, not because you love, and because I forgot how to breathe in warm water. She and Jacob met at a youth group. He immediately seemed different, confident, kind, not flirting. He didn't give compliments, he said the words, according to the Bible. Strictly, clearly, verified. "You look like Ruth," he told her one day. Devoted, meek, faithful. And for some reason she felt special. Although she didn't know then that all this praise was not about her, but about the image in which she asked to enter. He didn't hit, didn't raise his voice, didn't change, didn't refuse responsibilities. He was an exemplary husband. And yet, I don't feel alive next to him, she whispered in tears to her best friend after 4 years of marriage. I'm like furniture, beautiful, reliable, necessary, but voiceless. He prayed out loud, and her prayers were to myself. He said, God, grant our family humility, strength, and grace. She added inside, and freedom, at least a little, at least sometimes. Nobody hit, but I didn't touch it either. Never in all his years had he looked at her the way Matt looked at her later with a question, not as an answer, but as a secret. And now, in this darkness, in this old room, Joanna felt that all this time loved the idea of love, not a living person. She tried to pray, out of habit, without words. I just folded my hands. She closed her eyes. I started to pray, and she stopped. The words didn't come. All that was silence. Without God, no addressee, only emptiness into which prayer fell like a pebble into a well without response. She tried again. Nothing. She opened her eyes, got up, got dressed. She went out into the dark corridor. I walked past the old chest of drawers. Mother was sitting in the kitchen, in the dark, in a robe. It was as if she was waiting. Are you awake? Joanna asked quietly. I haven't slept for a long time. Mother didn't turn around. When you get old, dreams become short and unnecessary. Joanna froze. Then she came over and sat down opposite. The lights were not turned on, only the dim moonlight from the window. They were silent, just a minute, two. Then the mother suddenly said, You think you're the only one. First, the first to fall, the first one expelled, and you're just next. Joanna raised her head. What you'd... I was expelled too, the mother said simply, at 29. For a man, he was a tractor driver. Funny, poor, and not my husband. We spent 2 months with him. I got pregnant. Joanna froze. She had never heard this. And my father kicked me out. The church crossed it out. People turned away. Only your grandfather, my mother's father, took me to his place, gave birth. The child died 3 days later. Boy, they didn't want to bury him in the church cemetery, because illegitimate. She straightened up in her chair, slowly. Then I swore to God that I would never lose my temper again. Neither to passion, neither to weakness, not to love. And she never spoke about it again, not with anyone, before you. Joanna looked at her like she was a ghost. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Because you believed that I was a stone, and I tried to be him, so that you don't see how it's painful to live with this inside. You knew everything about me, from the very beginning. Certainly, I knew when you still thought you didn't know. Then why did you talk so cruelly about me, about hell, about the curse? The mother looked straight. Because I was afraid that you would burn out just like me, only me from the inside, and you are in plain sight. I wanted to shield you from pain, but apparently every woman must go through her own desert. And what happened then? Then, she grinned, I married your father. Correct, silent, solid, never loved him. But he gave me a home, and I paid him with obedience. And then she gave birth to you. Joanna felt tears in her eyes. Do I look like you? More than you think. Even when you reject it, you are still part of me. They sat in the dark. Now it's close, not like mother and daughter. How two women who were not saved by the church. The silence between them was different. Not like before. Now understanding. Do you still believe in God? Joanna asked. Mother shook her head. I believe in women who survive. This is closer to the truth. I tried to pray, Joanna whispered, but it doesn't work. Everything sounds fake. It's like I'm talking to a wall. Because you say it in the wrong voice. Try to be silent, and let God himself tell you if he wants. They didn't hug. We didn't cry on each other's shoulders. This was not the same family, not those women. But when Joanna went to her room, Her mother suddenly quietly added, I'm not praying for you, because I can't do it anymore, but I don't wish you hell. Joanna stopped in the doorway. Thank you. Just don't forget, the shadows in the corners are us. And if you want to see the light again, don't look in the mirror. Look inside. It's darker there, but more honest. The house was slowly thawing, not like spring stormy, with drops and the smell of earth, but like ice forgotten in a sink, quietly, with splashing in the pipes, with moisture in the corners. Every day Joanna tried to connect, not as a mother, but as a person guilty and vulnerable. She didn't expect forgiveness. She studied to be close, even if you are not forgiven. And still Sarah was silent. Not in the literal sense she was talking with her grandmother, with her brother, with her neighbor on the landing. But not with her. Each of their dialogues was technical, automatic. Sarah, have you eaten? Yeah. Did you do your homework? Almost. Do I need help? No. It was not silence. It was a lack of soul in the voice. And yet Joanna did not back down. Because I knew all real things begin with a crack. It was raining that day. Small, gray, long, like September melancholy. The roof was dripping. The old bedside table was dripping in the corner of the room, and the smell of wet wood was in the air. Sarah was sitting in the kitchen, reading a comic book. Joanna stood at the stove. I didn't dare turn around. She took an old teapot, the same one with a crack at the neck. The mother said, It still holds water, so don't throw it away. It was like its own essence. I thought, Would you like some tea? Joanna asked without turning around. Sarah didn't answer immediately, then hoarsely. Can. It was the first yes for many weeks. Not forced, not mechanical, just agreement. And it meant more than, let's have some tea. Joanna set the mugs down. I cut cookies. She sat opposite. Sarah looked out the window, not at her. But she didn't get up. They drank in silence. You could hear the rain drumming on the canopy. Then Sarah suddenly said, Do you know that I remember everything? Joanna put down her cup. I know. Not just that day. I remember how you betrayed me, and not only when she kissed that teacher, and even earlier. When? All my life. Silence. The clock ticked on the wall. The old hand creaked at every division. All my life you were. Not my mother, but someone else's actress. You did the right thing. She cooked, washed, and prayed. But you never didn't ask how I was. In fact, you didn't know what I loved, that I'm afraid, whom I hate. You were just there, like a ghost. And then you also left for someone else. And I suddenly realized that you are not a ghost, but just didn't want to be with us. Joanna nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. It hurts, Mom. I wanted to be proud of you. I protected you at school. I fought when they said nasty things. And you pretended that everything was fine, that nothing was happening, until you didn't ruin everything. Sarah's voice broke. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. I hate you. Sometimes, and sometimes I miss you. And it's terrible, because I don't know what you are like now. Who are you anyway? Joanna was silent for a long time. Then she spoke. I don't know who I am either. Okay, Sarah breathed. Finally, for once you're not lying. They sat in silence for a couple more minutes. Then Sarah asked, Why did you do this? Because I died inside, and I didn't know how to say it. Dad loved you. Dad loved me, who I tried to be. Not the real me. I don't blame him. I just didn't know how to be myself until it was too late. Sarah grabbed the mug with both hands. The rain got heavier. It smelled of linden tea and damp plaster. I was afraid that if I forgave you, then all of this would seem unimportant. This is important. Very. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm just glad you're with me now. I'm not with you. Sarah looked straight. I am against you. Bye. But I drink tea. That's already something. They drank in silence. The tea was tart and warm, from a cracked teapot. When Sarah stood up, she didn't say thank you, didn't kiss me, but she put the cup in the sink And then she stopped and, without turning around, said, "Tomorrow, maybe I'll show you a comic." 1. And she left. Joanna remained seated. 1. In the small kitchen where the kettle no longer held water as before, but could still heat. The light from the mailbox was cold and harsh. The morning was gray and humid. The air smelled of wet wood, earth, and rotten leaves. Joanna walked barefoot onto the porch. Dew covered the boards, but she did not feel the cold. She slept poorly, hardly slept at all. Her morning began not with prayer, not with coffee, but with waiting. She no longer hoped, but the habit of hope remained. There was a letter in the mailbox today, without a stamp, with the surname written in an even, strict handwriting. Sender's address, Fairhaven, church mailbox. Joanna squeezed the envelope as if it contained poison and returned to the house. There was no one in the kitchen. The mother left on business. The children were still sleeping. Joanna slowly opened the letter with a butter knife. "Joanna, I hereby notify you that the process of official divorce has been initiated. According to our preliminary agreements, the children remain under your temporary care while the case is being considered. My side insists on maintaining full legal and physical custody in the event that your behavior is shown to have a negative impact on their development. I also ask you to cease any contact with employees or members of our church community. If this condition is violated, I reserve the right to apply to the court for a restraining order. Financial issues will be resolved at the hearing. Sincerely, Jacob Maynard." No, darling. Not sorry, not forgive, not even explain yourself. Joanna sat clutching the letter in her fist until her fingers turned white. The words rang in her head like mockery. So that means now she object of legal consideration. Not my mother, not my wife, not a person. Paper. She slowly stood up, walked over to the trash can, and tore the letter into thin, uneven strips, then to even smaller ones, and threw it away. No screaming, no tears, only with a coldness in the chest that even rage could not burn out. An hour later, she heard footsteps. Small ones, lungs. It was Eli. He stood in the doorway in his pajamas, wrinkled the hem of his t-shirt, and looked at the floor. Are you angry, Mom? Why are you asking? Because your face is like Dad's when he talks about taxes. Joanna chuckled. Not fun, but for the first time in a long time, almost sincerely. I'm not mad, baby. I think, and when adults think, they sometimes look angry. Can we go somewhere? He asked. I don't want to sit in the house. She thought, and she said, let's go to the forest. The forest was 15 minutes from the house. An old path overgrown with grass led to a ravine, and then to a grove where, as a child, Joanna collected pine cones and built shelters from branches. The forest was not magical. He was alive, and this rustling and the smell of moss and puddles with reflections were what she missed. They walked slowly. Eli kept picking up sticks, kicking stones, asking questions. Why do the trees rustle? Because the wind talks to them. Why do the birds fall silent when we walk? Because they hear you, and they wait for you to leave. Birds don't like strangers. Am I a stranger to them? No, but you haven't yet quit. And you? I'm studying. They reached a clearing. Joanna pointed to the snag. Shall we sit down? They sat down. Eli began to twirl the branch in his hands and tried to whistle, but it didn't work. Joanna closed her eyes. Listen, she said. Don't say anything. Just listen. They sat in silence. 2 minutes. 5. Then Eli asked quietly, what should I hear? All. He fell silent again. A minute later, he whispered, wind, and a bird, and water. Well done. Now try it. Don't hear yourself. Don't think. Just be. He sat there, frowning in concentration. After. It's complicated. Very. But if you learn, then you can be anywhere and still be yourself. Even if everyone is evil. Especially then. They fell silent again. Joanna watched him sit with his back straight, serious, like an old man. And I felt, this child understands more than anyone. He doesn't ask questions about marriage, about divorce, about the church. But he looks, he remembers, and if she now gives him even a tiny shadow, he will remember her forever. "I'm sorry that we don't live where we used to," she said suddenly. "I'm sorry it's not like that." "I love this forest," he answered simply. "It smells like old summer here." She closed her eyes, and for the first time in many days, I didn't feel any pain in my chest. Only fatigue. Living simple. The one that comes after a walk, not after a trial. "Aren't you afraid that I'll leave?" he asked. She hugged him. "You are my son. I'll be there as long as you want me." "What if Dad says that you are bad?" "He has the right to think so, but you choose what to see." He nodded. He buried himself in her shoulder. "I hear the heart. It's loud. Because you found silence." They sat for a long time. The wind whispered in the branches. The birds sang again. Ely dozed off in her arms, and Joanna looked at the sky through the trees. This was not heaven, not forgiveness, not salvation, but start. The noise in the school hallway was familiar. It belonged to another time, the time when Joanna brought the children by the hand, when she was recognized and called Mrs. Maynard, with respect, with envy. It was as if her family were the portrait on the cover of a church calendar. 3 children, a beaming pastor, and she, a woman with a soft smile and fresh pies in her hands. Now she's here, there wasn't. Officially, emotionally, socially. But today was an evening of performances. Sarah had to recite a monologue from a school play. Joanna wanted to come. "Not for myself, for my daughter. Do not go up on stage. Do not sit in the front row. Just be. Be quiet. To be close." In the morning, when she carefully asked, "Will you be pleased if I come?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. Then, without looking up, "No, better not come." The voice was not rude, just straight, like a knife on glass. And yet, in the evening, putting on an old blue coat, Joanna boarded the bus that went to school. She climbed the back steps, walked deeper, and sat down on the edge of the seat. The air smelled of cold, aluminum, and foreign perfume. In her pocket is a crumpled napkin and a chocolate bar, which she nevertheless bought for Sarah, just in case. She entered the school building when the performance had already begun. On the walls are children's drawings, posters, familiar walls, which now seemed turned away from her. Voices could be heard from behind the curtain in the assembly hall. Laughter, applause. Joanna went to the door and opened it slightly. I looked. Sarah stood on stage, thin, serious, with a reserved face. In hands text. There is strength in the voice. She spoke clearly. No trembling. "I belong to no one. Not to you. Not to your fears. I am not the name you gave me. I am what you are afraid to see in the mirror." Joanna squeezed the napkin in her hand until it made a sound. She looked and felt her chin tremble. "Daughter strong." "Too much. It's too early." The audience applauded. Sarah bowed slightly. Didn't smile. Joanna closed the door. She didn't go into the hall. Didn't try to come over. She knew that this evening was not hers. She stood by the window in the hallway while the children left the hall, while the parents collected their jackets, while the teachers exchanged polite remarks. One day, John Meredith, a math teacher, walked by, looked at her, and looked away. He recognized her, but he didn't say hello. Sarah was among the last to leave. She was laughing with her friend. The face was almost happy. She passed close past the mother. I didn't notice. Or she pretended to. Joanna didn't call out, didn't follow. She remained at the window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. It was already getting dark outside. She came. She saw. She left. Nobody knew. The night was clear. The sky, rare for November, strewn with stars, seemed quieter than silence itself. Joanna was driving along an empty road in her mother's old car, which she managed to start on the third try. In the glove compartment, there is only a notebook, half filled with numbers and verses from the Old Testament. At my feet is a thermos with cold coffee. She was driving to Fairhaven. Not to stay, not to talk, only say goodbye. She saw the old church from afar, like a lighthouse, like a sign, lit only by a street lamp with a black cross casting a long shadow on the wet asphalt. The bell was silent. The windows are blind. But the church did not sleep. She always waited, and I always remembered. Joanna got out of the car. The sky was icy. The wind is from the north. Real, biting, pure. She wrapped her coat tighter around her and walked through the gate. Every step echoed in the ground like a drum. Years have passed here. Here she baptized her children. Here she prayed on her knees. I read psalms here. Here kissed her husband under the wedding dome. She walked to the door. Closed. Certainly, but she didn't even hope. She walked around the side of the building to the back entrance, where she once brought baked goods to church fairs. The door to the storage room was ajar. Apparently they had forgotten. She went inside. The air smelled of old wax, ashes, and prayers. The floor creaked. There were no candles, only dim light from the window, through which a single star broke through. She sat down on the first bench, where she always sat. "God," she whispered, "I didn't come to pray. I came to say goodbye." The words echoed through the empty hall. "I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm not asking for my husband back, or children, or a name. I just want to let go. I want this place to stop breathing in my dreams." She stood up. I walked down the aisle. I touched the pulpit, empty, smooth. Then to the font where Sarah was baptized. Then to the door where she said goodbye to her father when the choir sang, "Let there be light on your path." The tears fell silently, not despair, no pain, cleansing. As if with every step, with every touch, she brought the past out of herself. "I sinned," she said into the void, but it was present, not like before when I lived right, but dead. The wind whistled through the cracks. A single piece of paper flew up and fell from the floor. She sat back down, and just sat, in your church, like an exile, like someone who has returned. An hour later she left. The wind became sharper. The air was stinging. She stood at the steps. I looked at the sky, then towards the street where she once walked home with her children by the hand. Now alone, but not empty, because for the first time in many months she said goodbye, with a place, with you, with shadow. She took a key from her pocket, small, from a music box, an old thing from their bedroom. She always played Amazing Grace. Now it doesn't play. She placed the key at the threshold. I just put it down, like a sign. Goodbye. And she walked away. The wind hit my face, but it was a new wind. From the north, clean, fresh, without a past, empty-handed. She didn't know where this path would lead. But for the first time he was hers, and only her. At first she just took out the box. A cardboard one, lost in the depths of an old chest of drawers, between towels, vases without flowers and books that no one opened. The box smelled of old paper and something alien, subtle, almost imperceptible, like the breath of a man who would not return. Joanna sat down on the floor in the closet, where it was cool, where no one could see her. His fingers clenched the cardboard. There are letters inside. Matt wrote by hand, carefully, without rushing. His letters were alive, like a person who always has time to listen. He didn't swear. He didn't promise. I was just writing. About myself. About her. About what I understood. She didn't reread it. I couldn't. She knew by heart what these lines said. "I don't know where this is all leading, but I know that with you I became quieter, and the world is louder. If you leave, I will understand. But if one day you still want to speak, even without words, I will be where you left me. You teach me silence, but I hear you louder in it than in the most beautiful speeches." Every letter was not love, and her right to be alive. But now it was yesterday. The night was clear, cold. She went out into the backyard and covered herself with a shawl, as in childhood, when she ran away from the loud conversations of adults. There are matches in his hands. In front of her is a metal bucket. They didn't say goodbye. She didn't cry. She simply took the first letter, crumpled it up, and lit it. The fire hissed and ate the edge of the paper. The letters flashed and disappeared as if they had not been written. Second, third, fifth. Each letter burned quickly, like everything that happened between them. The fire was not terrible. He was honest. He didn't ask questions, didn't judge. He's just doing what I had to do, clean up. When everything burned down, she looked into the coals for a long time. Smoke spread across the yard and mixed with the wind. Only ash crumbs remained in her fingers. She wiped her hands on the hem of her dress, and for the first time, I didn't feel empty. A silence. A quiet, final end. No pain, not love, and the lies in which she was hiding. Sin burned away. Not redeemed, but was released. She woke up to sounds in the kitchen. This was no ordinary noise, not alarming. He was alive. Joanna sat up in bed. It was getting light outside. The air was clear, thin, almost spring-like, although winter has not gone yet. Someone was moving dishes in the kitchen. The sound of knives, the smell of oil. She stood up. She went out into the corridor. She walked along the boards, feeling the cold under her feet, and she stopped. Sarah, in pajamas, in a ponytail, at the stove. She was making toast. In an old cast-iron frying pan. The bread is the one Joanna bought the day before yesterday. "Good morning," Sarah said without turning around. Joanna froze. The eyes filled with something warm, not with tears, and something soft, almost unbearable. "Good," she answered hoarsely. Sarah turned. On the face, smile. Real. Maybe not complete, not sure. But first, I thought I could do it myself. "You didn't sleep well yesterday." "Thank you," Joanna whispered. Sarah put the plate on the table. She handed her a cup of tea. "No sugar, I remember." They sat down, together, in the same room, at one table. There were only a pair of toast, soft light from the window, and two women, mother and daughter, which still had each other. Sarah took a bite of her toast, chomped, and laughed. "He burned down. Don't judge harshly." "I don't judge," Joanna replied. No one else. Silence. But now it's not hard. Homemade, lung, like a blanket. "Can we then go to the library?" asked Sarah. "Old comics have arrived there, and I want to show you one." Joanna looked at her daughter and felt, this is the return. Not big, not heroic, and here it is, through toasts and tea and a smile. She nodded. "Of course, let's go." And Sarah nodded in response. Seriously, in an adult way, but with eyes daughter who has not yet stopped loving. The library in Old Township was not so much a place as the breath of the city. She stood at the intersection of two roads, one leading to farmers' fields and the other leading to a cemetery. There were almost no tourists here. Schoolchildren came only on Saturdays, and elderly women came to read newspapers and discuss who died this week. Joanna entered this building for the first time with a different purpose, not to seek, but to offer oneself. She walked up to the receptionist's desk, a woman with a butterfly-shaped brooch and her hair neatly tied into a bun, held in place not so much by hairspray as by years of discipline. "Good morning. Kind. Do you, by any chance, have an open position? Half a day. Any job?" The woman looked up at her, at first neutral, then more carefully. Then I recognized it. A short pause, but not harsh. "Are you Mrs. Maynard?" Was. Now just Joanna. The woman tilted her head and squinted slightly. "We have freed up space. Assistant in the reading room. Arrange books, record returns. Help a little with school groups, sometimes spend quiet hours. The work is not difficult, but it requires order, silence, attention." "I know how to be quiet," Joanna said, "and I'm very attentive, especially now." That's how she started. The first day was almost invisible. She was not introduced loudly. It wasn't announced in the newspaper. She just walked in and started part of the space. She was wearing a gray cardigan, her hair was tied up in a bun, and her face was without makeup. Next to the counter is a calendar with a quote. No one can rewrite the past, but everyone can write a new page. She noticed this, but she didn't smile. Not yet. She was arranging books on the shelves. Alphabet, sections, genres, women's prose, American history, reference books. In his hands are cards, a pencil, a library notebook. Her world became narrow and, for the first time in a long time, manageable. At first, they didn't notice her. Then they started nodding, then asking where to find Charlotte Bronte, where are the new books about growing tomatoes, how to get a pass to an evening lecture. One old man said, "Your hands are calm. Books love you. They are not afraid to fall when you pick them up." She nodded. Thankfully, she smiled, just a little bit. Sarah came sometimes. She sat at a table by the window. I was drawing. I wrote my own comics. Sometimes she raised her eyes and simply looked. And Joanna felt there is no longer anything alien in this look. One day, while arranging her books, Joanna found a volume of poetry by Emily Dickinson. She remembered one line, almost word for word. Hope is the thing with feathers that sits in the soul and sings a melody without words. She clutched the book to her chest, for the first time not from pain, from recognition. 3 weeks have passed, then 4. The library has become a place where no one asked whose wife she was. Nobody remembered the pastor. Nobody judged. Nobody is blessed. Only books, only words, only silence. One day a woman approached her. Young, hair curls, eyes in fear. There is a child in his arms. "Sorry," she said. "I have. A strange question. Are you Joanna Maynard?" "Yes. I heard that you survived all this." "Did you cope?" Joanna looked at her. For a long time. Then she nodded. "No, I couldn't handle it. I just keep going." "Does this mean what is possible continue?" She took the woman's hand. "This means that even when you have lost everything, you still have a choice to be yourself or remain a shadow. I choose to be." When the library closed, it was the last one left. She closed the blinds. She stroked the spine of the book. She went outside. There is wind in the sky, but not northern. Warm. It's like I came from her. The morning was cold, but calm, a rare balance in northern Indiana, where the weather usually either whispers or screams. In Joanna's small room, on an old desk with scratches and ink stains, lay a blank sheet of paper. Nearby is a fountain pen, the one Jacob had once given her during their first Christmas season together. She didn't hold this pen in her hands for years. Too personal, too symbolic. But now she was just a tool. Neither promise nor nostalgia, simply a means to say the last word. She exhaled, ran her palm over the sheet, and began to write. "Jacob, I am not writing to you because I am waiting for an answer, and not because I want to return something. I am writing to let go. You, myself, everything between us became too heavy to carry. You were a good husband, in the sense in which we were taught persistent, honest, servant. But being good does not mean being alive. We both lived as if we were performing a score recorded by others. There was no falsehood in it, but also there was no music. I didn't leave you. I left silence which we were both afraid to admit. From a life in which I was a woman at the altar, but not a woman inside yourself. I have committed a sin. I don't condone this. But this sin was my first act, where I felt like I was breathing. I'm not the person you knew anymore. I'm not a pastor's wife. Not the one who bakes pies, sews children's shirts, and prays by letter. I am a mother, a woman, a librarian. I am the one who rebuilds myself every day from the ashes. You don't have to forgive. This is not a request. This certificate. I'm grateful to you. For the years, for the children, for the house. But I don't regret that it's all over. May your life be quieter, and mine is more truthful. Joanna. She didn't sign yours, didn't set a date, didn't put it in the envelope. She just put the letter in the box, where now only personal belongings were kept. No icons, no crosses, only her. The letter had no address. It didn't need an answer. It was her last prayer, without an altar, without a pastor, without God, only from a woman to a man with whom they once shared a surname, but now they shared only memory. The news spread quickly. In Fairhaven, where telephone wires served not for calls, but for rumors, the appearance of a new pastor was the event of the year. His name was John Ellerby, young, 42, originally from Tennessee, strict but humane. His sermons were lively, and he often inserted examples from real life. Someone even said that he had read Haruki Murakami. But it caught everyone's attention. Caroline Ellerby, a woman with a soft voice, with bright scarves, with the smell of lavender. She was not a church icicle. She knew how to laugh. Too loud for a church wife. It's too light. One Saturday, Joanna was putting away books in the children's section of the library when Caroline walked in. In his hands is a basket of cookies. There is an open smile on his face. "Good afternoon," she said, not coming too close. "I'm Caroline. We are only recently in the city, and I heard that you work here." Joanna looked up from the index card. "Good afternoon. Yes, I'm here. Every Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday." "Great. I thought you might be interested. My husband and I organize an evening service. It is more free, without official liturgies. Circle of communication. Tea conversation. Not about sin and punishment. About the present. We invite not as a pastor and his wife, but as people who are simply interested in listening to others." Joanna looked at her. Caroline's face was open, not deliberate. There was no catch in her voice. She didn't know everything, or she knew and didn't pay attention. "Thank you," Joanna said, "but I don't go to church. This is not really a church. It's just a place to be. No requirements. Doesn't matter. Sorry, but I found another place where I found it." Caroline nodded. "No offense. Then maybe you can just come in and have some tea sometime." "No sermons. I can cook pear pie." Joanna smiled, barely. "It sounds tempting. But I need a little time. I'm still learning to be in a world where I'm not misidentified. And Caroline said quietly, I'm learning to be close to those who know how to be truly honest." They looked at each other, not like the former pastor's wife and the current one. How woman and woman. Both are people who have lived too long. Both are those who chose not ritual, but truth. There was frost in the morning, a thin, crispy crust on the ground, a white fringe along the edges of the windows, shiny tears on the stems of grass. Joanna stood by an old wooden bench at the edge of the garden and held in her hands a stack of letters tied with a rope. Not from Matt, not from Jacob. These letters were her. Diary pages, notes, drafts of thoughts she never said out loud. She dug them up by chance in a box with winter things. The handwriting was hers. Ink is faded, but the words were foreign. "I am a vessel. I must be complete, even if I am empty inside. Sometimes I pray, not to God, but to my 5-year-old self, so she knows we survived. I don't want to die. I just want to disappear, so as not to drag down other people's expectations." She sat on the bench and read it all, as if she were reading an obituary. Not your life. Its former, quiet, false shadow. It wasn't a tearful scene. No goodbye to drama. It was like a memorial service for a person who no longer exists, not because he was killed, and because he grew up. Joanna took out an old tin bowl and put all the sheets in it. I lit a match. The flames rose quickly and hotly. The paper cracked like old leather. The words disappeared, line by line. I was silent. Now I'm saying. I was kind. Now he's alive. I was a wife. Now I am. She sat until the last ashes turned gray. She sprinkled earth on top, saying, "Go, return to the soil. You fed other people's flowers. Now give life to mine." The wind moved a strand of hair. The sky has cleared. It was not forgiveness. It was completed. That evening, Sarah entered her room without knocking. She was holding a thick notebook with a red eraser in her hands. She sat in Joanna's desk drawer, the same diary where there were notes from exile, reflections, sometimes snatches of phrases, almost poetic. "I found it," Sarah said. The voice was even, but there was anxiety in the eyes. "I didn't look for it on purpose. I just saw it, and I started reading. I didn't know if it was possible, but she couldn't stop." Joanna sat down on the edge of the bed. Sarah remained standing. They looked at each other. Two women between whom finally there was no role or position, only the truth. "You wrote that sometimes you didn't want to wake up, that you felt like you were already dead, many years ago, before us." "Yes," Joanna answered simply. "And you wrote that you cheated not because you loved someone more, but because I wanted to feel that you there is. This is true." "Yes." Sarah came closer. "Did you hate our life?" "No. I'm her. I was afraid. I was afraid that if I said that I felt bad, they would stop loving me. And I was silent for so long that she became a stranger even to herself." Sarah sat down next to him, silently. The diary lay between them like a divided heart. "I thought you just ran away." "I ran away. But I didn't know what you were. It hurt so much." Pause. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "Because you were my daughter, and I thought I had to be strong. What children should not see their mother broken. And then it became too late." Sarah looked into her eyes, for the first time not with reproach, and with attention, with a desire to understand. "Now I want you to know me, not like a mother, but as a woman, which was wrong, who sinned, which I was afraid of and chose life, even through ashes." Sarah nodded, several times. Then she hugged me, just, without words, like a girl, like a woman, like a person who I forgave because I understood. And for the first time, Joanna cried not out of shame, and from the fact that she was heard. The morning started from the ground, from the smell of wet roots, from wet gloves, from strawberries that needed to be replanted. Joanna was standing in the garden. She is wearing an old shirt, knee-length trousers, and her hands are on the ground. Eli is nearby, watering. Sarah was measuring out where to plant the onions with a rake. Lydia was drawing in a notebook what their garden bed should be like. Architect of the future harvest. Mother came out from the veranda. There is a teapot in his hands. "Careful," she said. "The earth may melt, but the heart does not always. Take care of yours." "We don't save," Joanna grinned. "We're getting into it." Sarah suddenly said, "Mom, are you happy now?" Joanna stopped. She straightened up. I looked at the sky, then on the children. "I'm free." "Is this the same?" Lydia clarified. "No." Pause. "This is better." They continued their work. Pollen in the air, clay under nails, sunlight on the back of my head. No preaching, no names, only life. She walked out of the garden to the veranda. She shook the dirt from her palms. She sat down on the step. I watched the children laugh. And for the first time in many years, I didn't feel indebted, or guilty, or a saint. She just was. And that was enough. The wind passed through the field, stirring the grass like water. And in this wind, there was no memory of the past, only the breath of the one who finally returned to his place. Thank you for listening to the end. If you like this story, support it with a like and a comment. It is very inspiring to create new releases. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the next story. It will definitely surprise you. See you soon, and may there be more good stories in your life. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.